As far back as 1896, Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius predicted that changes in the atmosphere's carbon dioxide levels could alter the planet's temperatures. Since then, numerous publications about the human-induced phenomenon have been released, but often only in the English language. I spoke with a climate activist who's making these important findings accessible to citizens worldwide. Meet Sophia Kianni, social entrepreneur and founder of Climate Cardinals.
At 21 years old, Sophia is the youngest member of the United Nations Youth Advisory Group on climate change. She's been named Vice Media's Youngest Human of the Year, a National Geographic Young Explorer, and BuzzFeed's Youngest Woman to Watch. Her nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, has worked with over 5,500 volunteers to translate climate information into more than 100 languages.
When I was 12 years old, it was right after I had had my first class about climate change in 6th grade. And then I grew up going to Iran over the summers because both my parents are from Iran. And so right after my class, I went to Iran and I was struck by how horrible the air pollution was. And I learned that temperatures in the Middle East were rising more than twice the global average. And so I was a very bratty 12-year-old and I loved like starting discourse and arguments with my relatives. And so this seemed like the perfect opportunity to start a contentious discussion. And so I brought up the like facts that I had found online. And I was like, I mean, look how horrible the air pollution is. Isn't this like, what do you guys think about this? And when I was using these buzzwords like global warming and climate change, they were like, what are you talking about? And they used to always call me like a bulangu, which is like a megaphone. And they made like the same joke where they were just saying that I was just incessantly just like spewing nonsense and they didn't know what I was talking about. And so from age 12, I realized that I knew more about climate change, which is like the defining issue of our time, than my relatives, who I obviously as the adult figures in my life to turn to for advice and information. And so that was when I really became an advocate for climate education, and I worked to translate climate resources so I could teach my relatives about what I had learned in school. For me, it was like, wow, I was able to educate and teach my relatives about this just through the power of like working with my mom to translate these resources, which was such an unique and interesting experience that I think like from a young age was kind of a catalyst for realizing it's so easy to make an impact once you identify like an issue and then work to come up with a solution, especially if that can be scaled.
I decided to read more about climate change in Iran, and I became increasingly alarmed.
As Sophia dug deeper, she discovered a big deficit when it came to climate education.
Even the United Nations IPCC report, widely regarded as one of the most renowned pieces of climate literature in the world, is only officially available in the 6 UN languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. But these are languages that account for less than half of the world's speaking population. Meaning, the majority of people on our planet are unable to understand the documents and agreements being issued by the world's highest international political body.
Your approach was pretty unique too, like reaching out, trying to find people, as you mentioned earlier, the way you pitched it, let's find some people who are bilingual. So what other languages now are people learning about climate change?
Yeah, so the way that it worked was initially I recruited like just through word of mouth. I asked my closest friends, like, you speak Spanish, you speak French, like you speak Romanian, you speak Somali, can you do this initial, like we translated one short paragraph into a few different languages, kind of as a proof of concept to show people like, look at what we're able to do with volunteers. And then when we launched, we had all these volunteers from all around the world sign up to work with us. And it ended up that we had volunteers who were able and willing to translate into over 100 languages, which was incredible. And so now we've translated into so many different languages, like I was saying, like Somali, Romanian, Gujarati, Arabic, like all the UN languages, indigenous languages. The outpouring of support that we've seen from the community has honestly been incredible. And also the way that we work now is that we've been able to fundraise a pretty great amount of money. And we've used that funding to pay professional translators to do translations for us, because once I joined the UN's Youth Advisory Group on climate change, I realized that I had access to the UN network, and so I kind of pitched Climate Cardinals as a concept to like UNICEF and the UNEP and the Italian government, and was able to secure these partnerships where we translated a lot of important reports and documents for them. And we, in order to ensure that the translations were credible, worked with professional translation networks like with Respond Crisis Translation and Translators Without Borders, and we paid them to do translations for us using like grants. Like we won the National Geographic's Young Explorer grant, so I was part of that program, and they gave us like $10,000, and so we were able to use some of that funding to hire professional translators to actually do translations for us. And so through the professional translation networks that we have now, I mean, that's additional hundreds of languages that we're able to tap into.
Where is Nancy Pelosi? Is she back there?
In 2019, 9 climate activists went on a hunger strike and protested at the office of Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Declare climate emergency.
Declare climate emergency.
They said the U.S. government was doing too little about climate change and wanted to meet with the Speaker. Sophia was one of those 9 activists.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Are you going to be a complainant?
Yes.
Thank you. We have a complainant. Stop right there.
It's interesting you're talking about, we've talked about a lot of the things that you've done. One thing we haven't chatted about, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is you were involved in a hunger strike at a very young age, 17, I believe,
Yeah.
right? Tell us about that experience.
So when I was 17, I joined Extinction Rebellion for a hunger strike in Nancy Pelosi's office. This was right off the heels of her using rhetoric like calling the Green New Deal a Green New Dream, and not seeming very like climate enthusiastic. And I think that for me, I realized that doing this hunger strike would be a really incredible way of raising awareness to the fact that we needed congressional action on the climate crisis, and we needed our politicians to take climate change more seriously. I decided to skip school and to go to Capitol Hill and embark on this hunger strike that I then continued for a few days after. So I think that was also a really pivotal moment for me, because that was the first time that I ever had been thrust into like the spotlight, I would say, in terms of that was the first time I had like a article in the Washington Post written about me and started to actually like receive media attention. And I definitely, but it also really made me realize the impact that press and media have on conveying these issues to the public. Because I remember I had this very specific moment where this journalist had asked me, why are you doing this hunger strike? Like, was there not other things that you could have done? And I turned the question back to him and I asked, like, would you even be here if I wasn't doing a hunger strike? I don't think that you would be. Like, if I was just standing here and I was like, oh, we need climate action, there's no way you would have showed up to this protest. You're only covering this because you think that it's crazy and radical that a group of people, especially a 17-year-old, have decided to do a hunger strike. And he was kind of at a loss for words, because I had stumbled upon exactly why he was there, which was that he knew that it would be a controversial news headline, and that was the only reason why he was covering it. And so that was a point that I was bringing up, that for activists to get recognition and to actually bring important issues to light, there are extreme measures that you need to take. And I do think that as a 17-year-old, I thought that that was one of the best ways that I could raise awareness about the things that I cared about.
All this while the media is reporting on what the leaders say that they are going to do instead of what they are actually
In September of 2021, climate activist Greta Thunberg gave a speech at the Youth for Climate Summit in Milan, Italy. She mocked world leaders' promises to address the climate crisis.
Net zero by 2050, blah, 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 net zero, blah, 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 climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. But of course, we can still turn this around. Thank you.
The interesting thing about the UN Secretary General, I've seen him speak several times. He speaks passionately about climate change. But I think, I also think about Greta and her blah, blah, blah speech, blah, 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 that there's this kind of anger among young people that politicians, it is blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of words, no action. I was in Miami Beach for the Aspen Ideas Festival about climate change not too long ago, and an author there who's written a lot about climate change said that part of the problem is when you look at countries around the globe, the countries where climate change is a top 5 political issue, and people vote on that, this is really important to them, that you get candidates who don't just blah, 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 they get in and they try and take action. Here in the United States, he said, it's not a top 5. Does it make you angry that it's not a top 5? How do you get it to a top 5?
I think that it definitely makes me extremely frustrated, because I do think that when you look at countries like the US, where we are disproportionately polluting and are disproportionately wealthy, but then also we are kind of in a lot of areas shielded from the impacts of the climate crisis, whereas a lot of people living in like the Middle East and Africa, they're on the front lines of the climate crisis, and yet they're not even the ones disproportionately actually contributing to the climate crisis. And then we aren't taking ownership for the fact that we need to be contributing to climate finance for these developing nations, and that we need to be working on our own infrastructure and transitioning to renewable energy. And I think that definitely, like, something that I think would be great is to see more engagement by the current administration with youth climate activists that quite honestly really lobbied and helped to get Biden elected in a lot of key states, in terms of like the work that the Sunrise Movement was doing, for example, with galvanizing voters to vote specifically around climate. I think that we need a lot more education, honestly, about the interlinkage between political action and climate action, because I think that there's still so much rhetoric surrounding this issue, kind of like peddled by the fossil fuel industry, where it's like this notion of the personal carbon footprint, like eat less meat, guys, don't fly as much, instead of talking about like we need to hold these fossil fuel companies accountable, and the only way that we can do that is through meaningful progressive legislation that needs to be passed by these political leaders, and we aren't electing the right people. And I think that that kind of education and narrative being fed to the general public is hopefully a way that we can get people into office that will actually do something about it. And I think that opportunities for young people to be able to engage with decision makers, like the way that the UN does, where we have a youth advisory group. I mean, look at what the youth movement was able to accomplish with Greta, with these youth activists who got millions of people out into the streets to strike. I think that if we're able to leverage that same enthusiasm and that same understanding of social media to get people excited and invigorated, and to use that to get people to the polls, that is something that would have an enormous impact.
Do you ever feel like it's a fair fight, though? Because, I mean, looking at you and talking to you and looking at Greta and all these young people who are out there, and as you said, taking to the streets, being active, and you've got the fossil fuel industry that just can bankroll so much and pull the levers of power by, I'm going to give you a political contribution, I'm going to help you get elected. I mean, you're up against so much. It doesn't seem like a fair fight. How do you square that?
No, I mean, you're completely right. And I think that that's why there's also so much need for greater regulation and oversight over like political donations, for example. The only thing that we can, I think, hold on to is a sense of hope and optimism, and to think about the fact that I work with so many incredible young people who have devoted so much time and effort to, instead of like using their free time to like hang out with their friends, like they're doing what I'm doing, and they're dedicating their free time to raising awareness about the issue of climate change. And for me to see that like 8,000 young people signed up to work with Climate Cardinals, like that shows there are so many people in this current generation who care so much about this issue and have the power to make an impact. And I think that banking on young people and capitalizing on these feelings that we have towards wanting a better world and wanting climate action, like that motivates me and makes me think that the world is going to be in a better place, and that we just need to band together, look for ways to partner, and really champion intergenerational collaboration.
Being so involved, I always get the feeling that you know, there comes a point in time where, you know, somebody who's older sees you not as a kid, but as an adult, as a peer. But then there's also you know, it doesn't matter how hard you try, there's always going to be those, oh, that's so sweet, you're so nice, you know. Are you still facing that, and how aggravating is that? Or are people starting to look at young people like yourself and say, no, you're a peer, let's have a discussion, or is it both?
I mean, I think it's really hard, particularly like as a young woman in these spaces, where I do feel the need to constantly like have to prove myself in a way that I think is incredibly unfair, in that I think going into conversations with certain people, it's like they ask you what you do and then you have to explain it, and then it's only when I say like, oh, I go to Stanford, or I work for the UN, or I have this nonprofit, then their ears perk up and they start to take me seriously. But I've definitely had several instances where, like even at Collision, like the conference that I was speaking at in Toronto, I remember speaking to a number of attendees and they were like, oh, like, why are you here? Are you attending? And I was like, oh, I'm a speaker. And then they were like, oh, well, what stage are you speaking on? And I was like, oh, the center stage. And they were like, oh, you're giving a main stage presentation. And I was like, yeah, I am. And even like at the New York Times event that I was at, I remember someone else was like, oh, you're one of the judges for the panel. You're not just attending this. And I was like, no, I'm on the advisory council for the New York Times. Like, I'm helping with their climate programming. And I think that it's really sad that a lot of people that I talk to tend to have the default assumption that I am just there attending or just a participant, and it's only when I have to like explain my background that they take me seriously. But I do think that hopefully like things are changing, and that young people through representation in forums like the UN are being taken more seriously, because the fact that like our voices are being included in these important spaces and people are actually listening to us means that this is something that we're not going to go away. We're going to continue to use these spaces and to leverage our experiences to actually make an impact. And even if I have to explain myself 100 times and explain the experiences that I've had and my background, and that's finally what makes someone take me seriously, that's what I'm going to do, because I do think that I want to set a precedent that young women like me are contributing something meaningful to the discussion, and we do need to be taken seriously.
Thanks so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.